Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru. Chapter 6, Crane Dance. Sulu crouched low against the boom of the brilliant blue wind sailor while it skated like a dragonfly over a bottle green ocean. Water sluiced up like a shattered, sparkling curtain in the narrow craft's wake, and Sulu whooped with zealous enthusiasm when the sailor leapt for an instant into silence, then crashed down onto water again. Sea salt dusted his face and stung his dark eyes. "If all the happiness and excitement in my whole life," Sulu thought, "could be jammed into one pure, breathless moment, it would be now." "How are we doing, Poppy?" Sulu laughed again to hear how insignificant and fragile his voice became against the sound of a playful sea. When the old man just ahead of him on the craft didn't answer, Sulu leaned forward, rocking the craft, and called again, "Hey, Poppy, anybody home?" Tetsuo Inomata twisted as far as his 103-year-old muscles would allow, but didn't release his hold on the mainmast. "You're going to dunk us, boy!" His wrinkled golden face sat atop his orange flotation jacket like a happy sun-dried apple. Sulu leaned into the boom, cutting the sailor across a corduroy of swells that made it jump and twitch like a grounded swordfish. "I love this craft. I love this wind. How can you not trust wind like this?" "Never trust wind!" Tetsuo ducked the boom with the grace of an expert as Sulu swung it past him to bring the craft about. "The wind was here long before man was, and it's never much adjusted to man getting in its way." As if to prove the old man's point, a gust nearly tipped the boat sideways. Sulu rode with it frantically, bothered by the coincidence, but too elated with his success to back down. "One more," Tetsuo informed him sagely, once the craft was righted again. "One more, and we'll both be wet." Sulu opened his mouth to scoff Tetsuo's lack of faith, and the wind flicked the sailor's bow with an element's uncaring ease, flipping the sleek craft end over end. Salt water enveloped Sulu's sun-warmed torso in a rush of stinging, too-cool enthusiasm. He squinted his eyes shut, avoiding most of the pain ocean water could inflict, and rocketed to the surface with a single powerful kick. Bobbing between the swells like a lazy gull, he caught sight of the blue and white sailor not far away. Tetsuo's bald head and orange flotation jacket flashed in and out of his vision just beyond the capsized craft. After breaking down the sail and righting the board, Sulu helped his great-grandfather to a seat against the slender mast. "I don't need help," Tetsuo complained, but he didn't push Sulu away. "You never need help." Sulu lingered with one hand on the older man's wrist, not liking the chill feel to his great-grandfather's skin. He strove to cover his concern with a smile. "I'm heading for shore," he said as he fastened a rope to the craft's tow ring. "It's going to be dark soon, and I've still got to pack for tomorrow." "You don't have that much left to pack." Tetsuo shifted position to face Sulu as the lithe Asian rolled onto his back and started for shore. "You're already taking most of the family heirlooms." Sulu grinned. "Only some of them. It just seems like all." Tetsuo made a face that quickly dissolved into chuckling. "You know what I mean." "Yeah, I know." For a while they said nothing. The ocean whispered soothing secrets to no one, and the waves hissed a distant message to the gray-white sands 100 meters away. Sulu continued for shore, watching the sky over him darken while the last defiant red rays leapt through the eastern horizon as if to hurry the dawn. "Everybody's anxious for tomorrow," he thought, sighing. "I only want today, forever and always." Because tomorrow, he'd be gone. It seemed to Sulu not so long ago that Poppy raced him all the way to the old subway station and back, and sometimes even won. They were both much younger then. Sulu all of 9 or 10, Tetsuo only just in his 90s, but the 14 years between had come and gone like the flash of a distant white gull. Somewhere in the midst of them, Sulu devoted 2 carefree terms of his life to Starfleet, and Poppy began what would be a long, bitter struggle with what the neurosurgeons called a grade 4 glioblastoma. The man he sailed with today was immeasurably older than the great-grandfather that his childhood had left behind. Most of the medical jargon meant nothing to Sulu. Still, he understood enough to know that the growth in Poppy's brain could be controlled with radiation and chemotherapy, but could never be made to go away. Really? In the 23rd century? Anyway. It had moved in to stay, entwining with healthy nerves and tissue until removal of the tumor would require removal of most of what was Poppy. The doctors had no opinions as to how long the stressful regime of radiochemicals and toxins could go on. It would be years before the body's systems finally broke down, before 103-year-old blood vessels refused to tolerate the chemicals that seared them clear every week. When that finally happened, Sulu reached for his great-grandfather's hand as they sailed beneath the gently graying sky, trying to imagine those once strong hands crippled and useless. Without meaning to, he tightened his grip protectively. "Worried about tomorrow?" Sulu craned his neck up out of the water to see his great-grandfather studying him across the gathering dusk, and noticed his hold on the older man's hand for the first time. He didn't let go. "A little, I guess," he admitted, glad that Tetsuo missed the actual course of his thoughts. Command school isn't like the academy. They won't let me just be good at what I do. There, I'll have to be good at what everyone else does, too. That's kind of the point of being a captain, I guess." His voice trailed away into a sigh. "I don't want to do anything wrong." Tetsuo made a small noise that Sulu took to signify his displeasure. "How asinine!" "It's not asinine." Sulu's cheeks stung as much as his pride. "It's a very serious thing. There's never more than 1,000 people in command school at any one time, and they're very picky about who they let stay." "And you think they won't let you?" Sulu paused in his swimming. "I don't know. I guess so." Tetsuo shifted toward the front of the little wind sailor. "Listen," he instructed. "Did I ever talk to you about cranes?" "This is command school," Sulu pitched his voice as a complaint, even though he smiled. "Not a construction company." Tetsuo laughed, splashing his great-grandson with a generous handful of water. "I'm talking about birds, not machinery." "You showed them to me at the zoo." Sulu returned to his swimming, angling his body to talk as he moved. "They all stood on one leg and stared at us. I bounced peanuts off their heads, and the zoo attendant made us leave." "You were a terrible child," Tetsuo conceded. "And you folded me 1,000 of them out of the napkins from my 17th birthday party." Sulu smiled at the memory. "At least you told me they were cranes. I thought they looked like ducks." "Those are ducks," Tetsuo allowed dryly. "Whoever invented origami just thought cranes would sound more distinguished. You know why I folded you all those cranes?" "You thought I liked birds?" "No," Tetsuo told him. "It's because of a Japanese legend." Sulu rolled his eyes in mock disbelief. "Uh-oh, more Japanese philosophy." It was a private joke between Sulu and the old man. Like Sulu, Tetsuo was born of immigrants, grown old in California without ever having seen the Asian sun. "Will you listen to me?" the old man complained. "I was just going to tell you that the old Japanese believed if you folded 1,000 origami cranes, preferably while meditating, you could make a miracle happen." "Did you?" Tetsuo shrugged. "You got into the academy, didn't you?" Sulu made a face, admitting that he'd walked straight into Poppy's verbal trap. "So, what has this got to do with me in command school? Did you fold more cranes to make sure I wouldn't flunk out?" "I didn't think of it. I was actually going to talk to you about real cranes, not paper ones." "Okay," Sulu allowed. "I'm listening." "Do you know why they all stand on one leg?" Tetsuo asked him. Sulu shook his head. Then, realizing Tetsuo, no doubt, lost the motion in the waves, he added, "No, Poppy, why?" "Because they're clumsy as hell. the old man replied. Nature really blew it when it came to giving cranes virtues beyond their good looks. So whenever the birds put both legs on the ground, they trip over themselves. Sulu burst into laughter. I thought you were going to tell me about biology. I am telling you about biology. Don't you think nature is part of biology? Are you sure I'm not being exposed to Japanese philosophy? Sulu asked, trying to contain his mirth. I don't know any Japanese philosophy, Tetsuo snorted. Are you going to be quiet and listen? Does this have something to do with why origami cranes look like ducks? Sulu asked. I said be quiet! Sulu slapped a pleasant, schooled expression on his features. Okay. Apparently satisfied, Tetsuo settled back against the mast and went on. In the hopes of fixing things up, nature went through and gifted some cranes with the grace she left out of the others. Even the cranes don't know which ones. They can only find out by trying. Purple shadows played across his face as he angled his head to look down at Sulu. Every crane has to have the courage to put both feet on the ground, he said seriously. Take a few steps. Find out the hard way if you can dance. A dancing crane is a very beautiful thing to see. But it's hell for the cranes that fail, because they have to look at the cranes all dancing and know what they might have been. Sulu didn't comment. Gulls cursed angrily above them, and from not so far away, Sulu thought he heard the whooping of a lonely white crane. We're just like the cranes, you and me, Tetsuo said finally, softly. While everybody else is worrying about how to balance on that one safe leg, you and me are out seeing how far the other one will stretch. Even if you fall, you've got to remember that everybody really has two legs after all. Even if you stumble, you can always get back up again. Sulu listened for the crane again, but heard nothing now except the gulls in the sleepy sea. Does this mean you don't think I should worry about command school? Tetsuo smiled down at him. It means I don't think you should worry about command school. You'll do fine. He grinned in return and kicked a small spray of water over the prow of the sailor. And you said you didn't know any philosophy. Tetsuo shrugged and splashed water back at him. I don't. I read that in a book a long, long time ago. Returning the rented wind sailor took longer than the commuter shuttle back from L.A. By the time they reached Oakland, Sulu and Poppy were both still damp from their excursion. Leaving his great-grandfather in the foyer to discard his sandy shirt and footwear, Sulu kicked off his own shoes while padding into the kitchen to turn on the lights. A piteous howling erupted in answer to Sulu's touch on the light panel. The young cadet cursed shortly and shouted at the plant across the kitchen from him. Shut up, Filbert! Long, fuzzy green tendrils snaked back across the countertop to curl about the meter-long pot, as if they'd never strayed. Filbert emitted another wail of despair, and Sulu was forced to cross the kitchen in 2 hurried strides and clap a hand over the plant's flattened central trunk. Filbert whimpered and fell silent. Has nobody fed you today? Sulu asked, feeling immediately sorry for his harsh tone when the plant gently entwined his hand. Tetsuo snorted as he shambled into the kitchen and found himself a seat. It can't answer you, he advised sagely, and it'll eat your hand if you stand there much longer. Sulu disengaged his hand with little effort. You also said my iguana would eat Mom's parrot, didn't it? The parrot ate the iguana, Poppy. Sulu ducked back into the pantry in search of one of Filbert's mice, but only found dried earthworm left over from his attempt to keep a carnivorous Rosarian ivy. The Tellurian green cat ate the parrot, he continued upon returning. That's why I gave it to George Temu, remember? Tetsuo waved off the details as unimportant. Did it eat his mother's parrot? Sulu dumped a handful of earthworm down Filbert's open mouth. She didn't have a parrot. Smart woman. Sulu dug into the container for another serving of worms, nearly spilled it all over the floor. when the viewer next to him chirped. Jerking his head up in surprise, he called, "Yes?" before even considering whether or not he wanted to answer. Whatever greetings he normally uttered leapt from his mind the instant he met Arthur Coburn's stern and storm-like gaze over the viewer. "Where the hell have you been?" Coburn's harsh attitude caught Sulu completely unprepared. He glanced at Poppy, found no help there, and just shrugged stupidly. "Sailing," he said, feeding Filbert again. "Why?" "How are you doing, Dr. Coburn?" Poppy called from the kitchen table. Coburn shot a glance in that direction, but Sulu knew the angle of the viewer would keep him from seeing Poppy or the table. Sulu pushed Filbert to the back of the counter and stepped forward to turn the viewer slightly. "They've been waiting for you in radio chem since this morning," the neurosurgeon informed Tetsuo with ice in his tone. "They wanted me to send an orderly out for you." "I'm not a child," Tetsuo told him, with perhaps more force than Sulu thought necessary. The old man's hand found a paper napkin in the table centerpiece, ripping it into tiny squares without apparent thought. "My great-grandson here's almost a starship pilot. We don't need you chasing around after us as if we were children." "Then act like an adult," Coburn shouted at him. "Act like you understand the responsibility you have, and stop dragging your great-grandson along as if he can keep you from getting in trouble." Sulu felt Fear's left-handed cousin start to stir inside his chest, and he pushed in front of the viewphone hastily. "Dr. Coburn, we were just sailing," he began, but Coburn silenced him. "Ask your great-grandfather why he wasn't at the hospital today." Sulu blinked at Coburn, then looked over his shoulder at Tetsuo, only to be confused by the old man's reluctance to meet his eyes. "What?" "Your great-grandfather skipped his therapy," Coburn clarified. His voice was tight with anger and whatever emotion provoked parental lectures on disappointment and duty. "If Radio Chem had hounded me of all people, one more time about how important these therapy sessions were, I'd have killed someone." "Poppy?" The old man reluctantly looked up from the crane he was patiently folding. "Is that right?" Sulu pressed. "You skipped your therapy?" Tetsuo made a face and shrugged an indefinite reply as his attention returned to folding. "What are you, Art?" he asked of the neurosurgeon on the screen. "Private detective now, too?" "I'm a doctor," he exploded. "I'm supposed to make sure you do what's best for your health. Mr. Inamata, I'm supposed to take care of you. What if I don't want to be taken care of?" Sulu crossed the kitchen to sit in the chair next to Poppy. "Why?" he asked, frightened. "Did you forget?" "I didn't forget." He seemed offended by the suggestion. He flicked the limp paper crane across the table. It skittered over the edge and out of sight. "It makes me sick," he admitted. "It makes me feel all sunburned, and I figured I'd be getting enough sun as it was." Casting an angry look at Coburn across the kitchen, he complained, "Being a day late can't make that much difference when you're my age. But after the treatments, you feel better for the rest of the week, don't you?" Coburn insisted. When Tetsuo didn't respond immediately, Sulu pressed, "Don't you?" The old man sighed and started on another square of paper. "For 2, maybe 3 days at the end. Before then, my head hurts and my skin hurts, and sometimes I can barely stand. I go to the bathroom all the time." He paused in his folding, running a hand through Sulu's close-cropped black hair with a smile that nearly made the young man cry. "I wanted to go wind sailing with you today. You're going to be gone to command school tomorrow, and I might not get to see you." He swallowed whatever he'd intended to say. "It'll be a long time," he finished. "I didn't want to be throwing up the whole time we were together." It's only across the bay," Sulu scolded gently. "I'll visit when they let you." Sulu smiled and tousled Tetsuo's thinning hair in kind. "This is Starfleet, Poppy, not jail." "I just wanted to go with you," Tetsuo said again. "Well, you're coming in here now. I'm sending a volunteer to get you." Coburn gestured at someone off screen. The doctor's expression made Sulu suddenly want to remind him that Tetsuo was old, not stupid. He exchanged long-suffering looks with Tetsuo instead and accepted the half-completed crane his great-grandfather passed him. I could bring him in, Sulu volunteered. Coburn scowled and shook his head. Your great-grandfather says you're leaving tomorrow. I don't want to disrupt your schedule any more than it already has been. He seemed to notice Tetsuo's half-clad state for the first time and added, Take your great-grandfather upstairs and get him dressed. Someone will be there in about 15 minutes. I'll bet he was a brat when he was little, too, Tetsuo intimated when he and Sulu were halfway up the stairs. Sulu smothered his laughter and hugged Tetsuo soundly. They'll sign me soon, he promised, wishing tomorrow wasn't hurrying upon them so fast. It'll be one of the big starships, Poppy, you'll see. I want you to be there when it happens. I want you with me when I go. Tetsuo held on to Sulu longer than the young man expected. I love you, he whispered warmly in Sulu's ear, and I'll always be with you. Always. When he finally broke the hug, Sulu saw that they had crushed the little half-finished crane. Sulu pressed back into his aircar seat as the Pacific Ocean caught a great sheet of sunlight and threw it up at the aircar. He squinted his eyes shut against the light, marveling at the people milling about the landing field below him. Out of the whole galaxy, billions of people, only 1,000 of us are here. The thought made Sulu's stomach crawl up into his windpipe again, and he looked back at the command school landing pad in the hopes that studying the ground would smother some of the panic he felt building inside. The air car ahead of them was a commercial transit. No one held up the 6 cadets who exited with long and tearful goodbyes. Sulu's little air car landed without having to wait for a window. Well, this is it. Sulu's hand was cold and trembling when he closed it on the handle of his carryall. His door was open, his right foot touching the warm landing pad. He missed home already, and was irrationally afraid he might never see his family again, especially Tetsuo. He knew the old man wanted to drop him off today, but the treatments made him so ill, and Sulu didn't feel he had the right to bring him. Excuse me, sir, a polite computer voice interrupted his thoughts. We are delaying on a private access pad. Embarrassment stung his cheeks momentarily. Sorry, he murmured, feeling stupid. Thank you, I'm out. The door closed without a sound, and the air car climbed into the sunny, salty-smelling air, leaving Sulu alone. It was a good morning. Sulu tried to distract himself with that knowledge as he headed for the main building, turning his back on the air car now landing. It was already warm and uncharacteristically clear for late summer San Francisco. A hood of mist along the crest of Mount Tam blushed pinkly in the early morning sun as the Golden Gate Bridge swept across the bay like a daring ballerina. The bridge's delicate silhouette reminded Sulu of Poppy's dancing cranes. Thinking of his great-grandfather somehow cheered him and hurt him at the same time. He didn't want to leave him behind, but didn't want to be a peg-legged swamp crane either. Grasping for some distant rapport with Tetsuo, Sulu tucked one foot behind the other, hoping to unobtrusively test Poppy's theory of one-footed confidence before leaving these wide-open spaces. He swayed ever so slightly and bumped into someone behind him. Hey, what are you, a nosy who doesn't know how to walk? Sulu botched regaining his footing and stumbled another few steps before completing his turn. The woman with whom he collided pushed him upright and demanded acerbically, Let me guess, you don't speak English either. Sulu thought that must be a joke. Her own accent was so pronounced. He smiled and extended a hand. No, I don't not speak English. My name's Sulu. She furrowed her brow distrustfully, but accepted his handshake. You just don't speak English well? Sulu fell into step beside her to join the migration toward the main building. I'm from right around here, actually. I was born in San Francisco. When she volunteered no reply, he prompted, I don't think I caught your name. Maria Teresa Perez Salazar, she admitted after a considered pause. Her gold-brown hair was pulled so severely toward the crown of her skull, Sulu found it somewhat amazing she could draw her face down, and to the expression of displeasure it now wore. He opted not to comment on that, but thought he'd have to watch her to see if her demeanor ever changed. My friends call me Mate. Sulu also decided she didn't necessarily consider him among that privileged circle. I take it you're not from around here? Perez Salazar tilted her chin infinitesimally higher, but her expression was etched in titanium. I'm from Mexico City. I attended the academy in Tempe. You speak English very well. He'd hoped it would be a compliment, since she seemed as preoccupied with proper English as a high school teacher, but Perez Salazar only snapped him a cold, lizardine look and reproved, Of course, Mexico is a very civilized state. When she lengthened her stride to outdistance him, Sulu didn't try to keep pace. Starfleet's finest, he muttered toward her back. Wow. He managed to cultivate 2 more successful conversations in the line leading into the main building, one with an Australian who'd lived on Earth for his entire life, another with a human who'd never been to Earth before. It was an interesting comparison of cultures and intellect. He and the Australian were exchanging opinions on the West Coast's best wind sailing spots when Sulu's turn at the admission station came up. The lieutenant on duty had to hail him 3 times before he realized she was speaking to him. He swung about guiltily. I'm sorry, sir, I was talking. The small lieutenant smiled and pushed a square of coated tape across the counter at him. I noticed. Here. You'll need these to find your bag once you get to the billets. I thought a computer would be doing this, Sulu admitted as he hefted his carry-all onto the counter. You'll see enough machines the rest of the time you're here, the lieutenant assured him. We try to keep things as personal and low-key as we can the first day. The bag disappeared behind the counter. Around me and to your left, cadet. You'll be issued your uniform and an agenda for the day. Good luck. For the next 3 hours, Sulu barely had time to blurt out thanks for the instructions and orders he was given, much less converse with the other cadets. He lost the Australian shortly after relinquishing his bag, but Mate Perez Salazar seemed to cling to his peripheral vision like a berm runner on an illegal hyperjump. Once he'd changed, logged in, been issued a counselor, a billet number, a class schedule, a block, carried about and delivered numerous medical records on himself, identified himself for more computer systems than he'd ever have dreamed, and tried to explain to an indifferent liaison officer that he wasn't Das Res Pamudan from Isrando on Sheshwar. He was pushed down a long windowless hall and told to go straight, then left, wait in Sunside until a monitor comes. Next! It was a long, perplexing walk indeed. He was perhaps 2/3 of the way to Sunside, studiously mirroring the route indicated on his hand-sized Dadex screen, before he considered that anywhere called Sunside was perhaps not a preferable place to be. All his imagination could conjure was lurid, molten still shots of Mercury's daylight half. He wondered why anyone would go there, much less name a meeting room after the place. A punishment cubicle, perhaps. Here at Starfleet's command school, we believe no raw potential should go undeveloped, blah, blah, blah. For example, impressive disciplinary results can be obtained through the use of pain. Sulu grinned and rounded the last corner before Sunside's entrance. Nearly 30 cadets looked up at his entrance, but no one volunteered a greeting until Sulu released his own grin and waved. Hi! We're taking a poll, called an extremely long-legged youth from the back of the room. Sulu laughed. Can I defer my response for an hour? They may kill us before then, someone else suggested. Another replied, I think that's why he asked. The conversation spread to another dozen cadets, and several inventive ideas were voiced as to the name's true meaning. Another 20 cadets joined them over the next 40 minutes, Perez Salazar among them, and Sulu was still trying to explain the gist of the guessing game when a small, trim Commodore interrupted the discussion. Her mere entrance proved enough to bring the room to its feet. After accepting a moment of the entire block at rigid attention, she called them at ease and sat herself on the edge of a table. Well, that was impressive. Her dark Mediterranean eyes were quick, and as calm as a midnight sky. Sulu liked her instantly. I'm Commodore Rachel Cohn, and I'll be your block commandant while you're here at the command school. You are Cadet Block W. You're here today because I, personally, wanted to make sure you all understood why you're in command school. She nudged a cadet near her with one foot. How about you? Why are you here? She answered without hesitation. Because I want to command a starship someday. Cohn nodded, turning to the rest of the room. You! She singled out another from the rear. What about you? My parents made me. Amusement stirred through the block at that. All right, that's honest at least. Then Cohn's eyes caught on Sulu's. And you! His mind became a hissing white void. Despite that, he heard his voice say, To see if I can. Cohn nodded, but didn't comment on his answer. Okay, she said, standing. You seem to be an honest bunch. That's good. I like honesty. I expect it. Okay? Half the gathering expressed confusion. The other half nodded. Cohn crossed the room, gesturing as she spoke for various cadets to relocate themselves. Right now, we're going to perform the first of many scenarios you'll be forced to endure during your time here. This one's called Galactic Politics. Groans answered her announcement, and Cohn's grin grew wider. Get used to it, she cautioned. It's the second oldest profession in the cosmos. Everyone laughed. Now, Cohn continued, when I give the word, each of you is to check your computer to find out which planetary system you represent. Someone will be Earth, someone else Vulcan, someone else Klingon or Andorian or Altarian, etc., etc. A handful of cadets stood to help her drag a table toward the center of the room. The Klingon and the Romulan empires will sit at this table with the Federation. She pulled a random collection of chairs into a wandering circle farther out from the table. The Federated planets will sit here. Since the Federation and the empires control most of the galaxy's resources, those people will get to make decisions regarding the disposition of those resources. The rest of the Federation can help, of course, but, and here her eyes glinted with playful malice, the Federation and the empires can talk at will, to each other, to anyone else they want to. The Federated planets can talk at will among themselves and to anyone not seated at the table. However, they can't interrupt the three main powers at the table, and they can't take any action without the consent of the leading three. She retrieved another chair and placed it far away, against a distant corner. The Vulcans, she went on, who are frequently viewed as having the answer to most of the galaxy's problems, this was greeted with mild amusement, sit here. They can only interfere with galactic politics once every half hour, but have a wide range of possible activities. Each time another planet requests aid from them, however, their half-hour wait starts anew. This sounds pretty complicated, someone ventured, and Cohn stretched her hands out to either side in a helpless shrug. Real-life politics isn't like playing jacks, she explained. All I'm trying to do is simulate some of the restrictions and tensions existing in the real-life arena. You'll find details specific to your own situation in your computer. I'll be here to answer questions. Just stick with me, okay? No one said anything. Moving back toward her original seat, Cohn nodded. Everybody check their computer now to get your assignments, objectives, and limitations. This simulation will continue for 2 hours, or until somebody accomplishes something. She flashed him a sudden delighted smile. Let the games begin! Others about the room were already chuckling or moaning about their assignments by the time Sulu thumbed his retrieval button. The little computer screen flashed a series of code, and a column of print started its slow bottom-to-top scroll. Menac 3. Tech level 3. Sulu pursed his lips pensively. Tech level 3 meant no subspace radio capabilities and no warp drive. Rudimentary hyperdrive at best. He hoped his objectives didn't involve any long-distance negotiations or travel. Federation membership, Menac is not eligible due to her current political climate, affiliations, long-standing trade relations with Carstairs planet. Carstairs, a frontier world inhabited by 4 species bail jumpers and troublemakers. Sulu sighed. History, mineral poor, Menac 3 depends heavily on Carstairs for raw materials, interplanetary and interstellar relations with wealthier societies, and infusion of medical and food production technology, Menac 3 is approaching the end of its second industrial revolution. Sweeping political reorganization and economic upheavals are the results. The current parliamentary government is threatened by a separatist religious faction which believes a return to simpler times would be in Menac 3's best interests. Menac 3's political leaders do not agree. Rules of play. You can only communicate with the Federation through Carstairs Planet. Sulu looked up from his computer to scan the room. A dozen other cadets craned looks left and right as though trying to identify their allies by facial feature alone. Sulu noted that 2 of the table's 3 inhabitants were in place. Perez Salazar sat at one end. Sulu felt some sympathy for whomever fate chose to share that galaxy with her for the next 2 hours. "Who's Carstairs Planet?" he called congenially, turning back to his own affairs. On the floor, across the room, sitting with his back against the wall, a dark-skinned Maori jerked his head up in ill-humored surprise. Glittering black eyes darted left and right. "Who asks?" Sulu attempted his most disarming grin and waved. "I'm Menac 3. Settling back into his seat, he continued with his reading. "You can only communicate with the Federation through Carstairs Planet. You may communicate with any non-federated planet you choose. Since you lack subspace radio capabilities, all communications must be made via old-style radio waves. To simulate this, you may only contact other planets by written notes, passed from you to whomever you are contacting. You may not leave your seat. Objectives. The Federation has resources to alleviate many of Menac 3's economic and health problems. All you want is a chance to speak one-on-one to a Federation representative." Sulu nodded. Looking about, he saw a table near the main door, apparently stocked with props for their scenario. A painted scepter, assorted colored and numbered tokens, writing implements, and a great deal of paper. The motherboard from some electronic device. The Carstairs Planet Maori cadet took this, and a wheel. Sulu abandoned his seat to collect some paper and a pen, and settled in only a few chairs away from Carstairs to facilitate communications. After a single nervous, unhappy glare, the cadet ignored him. Sulu tucked his feet up under himself on the chair until he was firmly seated, tailor fashion. Licking the point of his pen with a flourish and then deciding not to do that anymore, he composed his first communique. "Carstairs, everybody's dying here. We aren't having a terrible lot of fun economically, and we understand you have some pull with the Federation Council. I'd desperately love a visit from a Federation representative. Any help at all would be appreciated. Love, Menac 3. He smiled, resisted the temptation to line the bottom of the note with hugs and kisses, X's and O's, folded it into a neat little square and turned to the young woman next to him. "Would you hand this down to the planet on the end, please?" Before she could reply, Cohen interrupted herself between them and plucked the note from Sulu's hand. "Foul, Menac," she informed him, grinning. "You can't talk to a neighboring planet. You've got to write." Sulu took the note back from her, annoyed. "You mean I have to write her a note? Just ask her to pass this note?" That struck him as ridiculously restrictive. Cohen only nodded. "That's what I mean. Try again." Sulu's second note was short and to the point. "Help! I'm being held prisoner in a complex Starfleet scenario. Please pass this note to Carstairs Planet. The social butterfly to your right, before it's too late." And the transmission to Carstairs was quickly on its way. Carstairs gawked at the note, stared in almost horror at the cadet who last touched it, and finally directed a black-eyed glare down the length of chairs at Sulu. Sulu waved again and smiled. This was going to be a long game. "I'll bet you've got quite a wait ahead of you." Sulu craned to look over his shoulder, finding Cohen still standing there, nearby, watching Carstairs. "Carstairs can't approach the Federation Council without at least one federated planet to support him. It's not always easy under normal circumstances. Narv's lack of social graces isn't going to work in your favor." Sulu sighed and glanced back at the other cadet. Narv was already kneeling near one of the outlying Federation chairs, talking quietly but gruffly with the inhabitant. "What am I supposed to do in the meantime?" he asked Cohen. "My planet's got a lot of problems." Cohn leaned over to tap Sulu's pad of paper. Sketch something. You can sell the art to other planets and upgrade your economy. Sulu perked up at the suggestion. Is that allowed in this scenario? Cohn's laugh was cheerful but not reassuring. No, but you might be able to buy yourself lunch with the proceeds. What about paper airplanes? Sulu twisted in his seat to follow her progress as Cohn started to move away. No! He flopped back into his seat with a sigh. He'd expected as much. 7 minutes, and 10 elaborate paper airplanes later, Carstairs and Rigel 5 made their way up to the main council table. Sulu sailed his last airplane in the general vicinity of an equally bored cadet who had been returning fire with clever, chittering paper constructions that reminded Sulu of kamikaze crickets, and settled in to observe Carstairs' plea on his behalf. Rigel and Carstairs waited another full minute before the Federation delegate finally turned to them and demanded, What do you want? Can't you see we're trying to agree on negotiation formats? The cadet snorted noisily and thrust a piece of paper up the Federation cadet's face. A list of demands, he growled, for my people. Who are you? The Federation glanced at the list, then deposited it atop the table between himself and the two empires. Perez Salazar plucked it up and studied it in silence. Carstairs planet, Rigel 5 volunteered, then flashing the Federation a ridiculously wide and stunning smile. I'm Rigel 5, already a member in good standing with Federation. Great! Federation's enthusiasm seemed limited. We'll consider your request and get back to you. All services are sorely needed, the Carstairs insisted when the Federation would have turned away. I insist upon immediate attention. Perez Salazar uttered something brief and sibilant. These requests are ludicrous, she exclaimed, pitching the paper back at Narv. The rumpled sheet caught the air and fluttered erratically off to one side. You want missile technology, computer assistant access to our data centers? The Federation's data centers, the Federation reminded her firmly. They aren't asking for anything from the Klingons. Perez Salazar twisted her mouth and narrowed her eyes. Racism again? You don't feel the Klingon Empire has anything to offer? Sulu covered his smile with one hand. Perez Salazar was the Klingons. He should have guessed. Nothing that we can't offer more safely. The Federation handed Narv back his note. Go sit down. We'll get to you. I ask little, Carstairs insisted. When the Federation didn't answer, the cadet turned to face Vulcan on the opposite side of the room. If I cannot appeal to your less compassionate neighbors, then I appeal to you, logicians, for recognition. The three at the main table uttered simultaneous, inarticulate cries while Vulcan looked at Cohen for direction. The monitor shrugged mutely. You idiot! The Romulan Empire howled. Hey, Cohen barked. There'll be none of that around here. This is just a game. The Romulan Empire wilted noticeably, weaving her hands into angry baskets in front of her. Sorry, sir. Cohen was still frowning as she nodded to Vulcan. Start timing your half hour again. Aye, sir. And that ended Carstairs' first round of negotiations. Sulu made sure a note was waiting for the Carstairs by the time he returned to his seat. What happened to my requests? 50 million more people have died around here. Don't I need food more than you need missiles? Narv's lips moved through the message slowly. Once finished, he scrawled a brief reply across the bottom, crushed the paper into a ball, and threw it back at Sulu. Sulu untangled the note to read what he already suspected it said. No. He flicked the ball away from him and started on his notes again. Hi, I'm Menak 3, a small, insignificant, and technologically underdeveloped planet in the Murasaki sector. Carstairs' planet is ignoring me, and I'm bored. Want to start a war? He folded the note into his most careful aircraft yet and sailed it across the room into Orion's lap with the delicate precision only a born helmsman could command. Orion's automatic reply was a chittering cricket. Sulu quickly folded a second plane, scribbling across the wings, "Read the first airplane," and bounced the second plane against Orion's chest. Orion blinked twice, raised his eyebrows, then set about trying to locate the message plane among the others. He found it, dismantled it, and read it. The reply arrived in Sulu's lap less than a minute after Sulu's secondary launch. Sulu unfolded the plane and scanned the answer. Sorry, Orion is officially hostile toward Menak 3. If I get into any kind of war, it'll probably be with you. Better luck next time, Orion 2. A chittering cricket bearing the proclamation, I am a primitive thermonuclear device, kablam, quickly followed up the note. Orion returned Sulu's startled look with an apologetic shrug, but didn't retract the mock bombing. Sulu dismissed him further, and Orion went back to folding his toys. Carefully tearing off the bottom part of the page, Sulu eliminated Orion's negative response. Somewhat more tattered, but still flight-worthy, the airplane looked like the only survivor of Orion's last message. He aimed it at random, hoping chance would help him find a sympathetic government on his own side of the room. The plane bounced into the lap of a stocky, red-headed female 4 seats away. Picking it up, she asked, What's this? Sulu captured her attention with a friendly wave. It's an old-style wave radio transmission. I'm reaching out to my fellow man. She smiled, but sailed the plane back at him. I'm tech level 2. I don't have the capabilities to receive an interplanetary transmission. Sorry. Sulu plucked the craft out of the air with one hand. Frustrated, he turned to the room at large and called, Is there anybody with a tech level 4 or better who isn't hostile to Menak 3 and wants to start a war? Even as the room burst into laughter, Cone called, Foul, Menak, from the other end of the room. But, foul! Cone was smiling, but didn't relent. You have to pass notes or you can't communicate at all. Sulu fingered the nose of his aircraft unhappily, slouching into an exaggerated pout for Cone's benefit. Do I even have to send notes to you? Cone snorted briefly with laughter. You can't send notes to me. Why? Who are you? I'm God. Now hush. Sulu had delivered his war offer to half the participants on his side of the room by the time Carstairs gained the Federation's attention for a second time. We're considering, the Federation irritably assured Narv before he could even speak. These are matters of much importance. Narv's tone of voice could have indicated anything from fury to pleasant neutrality. The Federation collected Carstairs' note, but didn't read it. More missiles? He inquired acerbically. Rigel 5 winced. Beyond him, a line of fidgeting delegates stretched nearly into a Vulcan's lap. Consideration of Carstairs' application, Narv persisted. We wish to be, as Rigel, federated into your ruling body. Starfleet doesn't rule, the Federation began, and Perez Salazar amended hotly. Tell that to the Romulans. Hey! The Romulan Empire leaned across the table in front of Earth to scowl at Perez Salazar. The Federation does not have us henpecked. I never said they did. And so ended Carstairs' second approach to the Federation Council. Sulu tore free a sheet of paper and began methodically shredding it into a pile at his feet. According to his timepiece, he had approximately another hour and 25 minutes to kill before this scenario reached its less than climactic climax. He resolved to make a pile as high as his seat before that time. You're wasting your national resources. Cone appeared at his shoulder, still wearing that infuriating know-it-all smile. You've got nearly 85 minutes yet, Ensign. My stock market crashed, Sulu replied. He tried to keep annoyance out of his voice, but failed miserably. Shifting to face Cone, he hooked one foot over the chair's arm and propped his elbow atop the back. It's pointless. I'm in a position where I can't do anything for myself. I'm paired with an antisocial Federation hopeful who isn't a great deal of help, and those three at the main table are still trying to decide what kind of china to use at their formals. When his comments only seemed to amuse Cone more, he turned away from her again, grumbling, And my cadet block monitor is a closet sadist that somebody gifted with Commodore's bars. Her hand took hold of his shoulder in warning. Careful. Sulu felt his face grow red. Excuse me, sir. Once Cone was gone, he reevaluated what he'd said to her. He didn't really want to quit. He didn't want to be a one-legged swamp crane who never learned to dance. What would Poppy say after spending all that time explaining about the silly dancing birds? Sulu smiled and glanced at the Federation Council on the other side of the room. Well, if the mountain wouldn't come to Muhammad... He attracted Kohn's attention by bouncing an origami crane off her shoulder. Expressing more irritation than he suspected she actually felt, she stepped through the assembly to squat by the arm of his chair. I want to go to the Federation myself. Before she could condemn or verify his plan, he elaborated. I know I've only got the wave radio capabilities, and I know they wouldn't be expecting my call, and I know it would take... He tipped his eyes, unconsciously sealing words as he figured. Nearly 18 months for the call to reach them. Kohn grinned at him. And you've only got 85 minutes to go. This is a scenario, Sula pointed out. Can't we compact time a little? Still grinning, Kohn reached behind his chair and came up with one of his many paper constructions. You seemed to be doing pretty well with these earlier? Sulu shrugged, and Kohn went on. If you can land a message on the main table, or even in the lap of a federated planet, anyone who reads it can act for you. Just because they rely on subspace communication doesn't mean they can't hear what you send. She unfolded Sulu's paper plane as she stood, dropping it into his lap. What if they won't read it, or they ignore you? Sulu shrugged, flattening the piece of paper. That I'm no worse off than I am right now. She studied Sulu so intently it made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. Only 75 minutes and 18 months to go, she said finally, breaking her gaze. You'd better start writing. And with an approving smile, she moved away. Sulu considered his note carefully. Knowing if he was to have any hope at all of Federation intervention, it would be dependent on how effectively he could convey his plight in writing. He discarded Kohn's unfolded plane in favor of a clean sheet of paper. Dear delegates of the renowned and honest Federation Council. He hated it immediately. Too wordy, too insincere. Scribbling out that line, he began anew and more thoughtfully. Dear champions of freedom. Yuck. He scratched out his second attempt and finally settled on a neutral, unimpressive, Dear members of the United Federation, I send you this communique on behalf of the citizens of Menak 3. Although not members of the Federation, we respect and appreciate the good your kind emissaries do throughout the galaxy. We appeal to you now for your aid. Menak is being crushed beneath the weight of economic and health turmoils beyond our ability to control. We are mineral poor, we are neglected, we are dying. Please, all we request is the opportunity to speak with you regarding help for our people. You have knowledge of medicines and safe power sources. Without your assistance, we fear Menak will have no future at all. Please, the governing body of Menak 3. Satisfaction displaced the frustration of only a moment ago. Sulu tucked the rest of his papers into a pocket and considered the best delivery method for his note. Paper wads were out since they were too easily mistaken for a personal affront. Origami cranes were more dense than airplanes and so traveled better over short distances, but they had a tendency to tumble while airborne, so didn't frequently exercise much accuracy in attaining their targets. Airplanes ran the risk of overshooting, and for reasons Sulu failed to comprehend, it seemed no one ever thought to unfold the planes to find their message. Still, airplanes seemed the best of the three alternatives, and 70 minutes really wasn't enough time to get creative. He hummed to himself as he folded the plane. The resultant vessel was hardly a work of art, but Sulu was confident it would traverse the distance necessary to deliver his plea to the Federation Council. He caught Kohn's eye as he inspected the lines of his aircraft and returned his conspiratorial wink with a somewhat embarrassed smile. No wind disturbed the air in the spacious room, so Sulu knew nothing but satisfaction as he watched his courier float cleanly over the heads of half his classmates and dip sweetly to a landing over the Romulan Empire's right shoulder. Perez Salazar was the only member at the table to even notice the landing. She made a face at the paper construct, then pushed it out of their work area. Sulu was folding another plane before Perez Salazar had even rejoined the heated discussion. He should have learned from his exchange with Orion. Scrawling a repeat of his "read the first airplane" message, he tossed the second plane toward the main table. This time, Perez Salazar snatched the plane while it was still airborne, crushing it in her fist. She fixed Sulu with a disapproving glare as she tossed it to join the first plane. In an agony of frustration, the ensign called, "Read it!" only to be drowned out by Cohn's stern, "Foul, Menak!" "Of course," he grumbled, slouching low in his chair. If this were indicative of galactic politics, Sulu was sufficiently convinced that he didn't want to be a counselor. He tore a sheet of paper into 6 rough squares, solemnly folding a crane from the first as he listened to the Klingon and Romulan empires argue about voting rights. In the smallest handwriting he could manage and still be legible, Sulu started at the nose of the crane and wrote, "This crane will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Then he decorated the crimped wings with 4, 3, 2, 1. He was disappointed there was no room left to write boom. Widening the tiny hole in the bottom of the crane, he inserted the tip of his pen to launch it. He stopped himself just before sending the crane on its way. Terrorism wasn't the answer, not if he really wanted to establish some rapport with the Federated Planets. He removed the little crane reluctantly and set about writing another impassioned plea. This note he folded as a crane, sufficiently discouraged with responses to his airplanes. He mounted it on his pen like the first, then snapped it catapult style toward the main table. The crane careened over the Romulan Empire's head, into the center of the table, and over the Federation's right shoulder. The Federation delegate growled something short and foul as he stooped for the paper bird. Sulu wondered if he were the only one to notice where the crane landed when the Federation tossed it offhandedly away. Vulcan started quite satisfactorily as the crane bounced into her lap, staring at the origami avian as though uncertain if she should touch it. Commodore Cohn?" The hesitant summons caused everyone at the head table to twist about in startled dismay. "Is this a communication, sir?" the solitary cadet asked, holding up the little crane. The Federation squeaked in indignation. "Where'd you get that?" he demanded, frantically scanning the room proper. "Who sent that?" Sulu wished desperately to be less than 3 feet tall. "Well, you threw it to me, but it came from over there." Vulcan pointed across the room towards Sulu. The young cadet waved. Does this mean I should start timing my half hour again, sir?" "No!" The Federation's insistence sounded more desperate than well considered. Cohn stayed where she was, against one wall, her arms folded across her front. "What do you think?" she asked with a shrug. Vulcan studied the crane very seriously. "Well, it is a transmission from an outside source." "Oh, come on," the Federation moaned. "So I guess it's only fair." "Fair?" Federation leapt to his feet to seize the crane from Vulcan. "Fair to drive the Federation to desperation just because some jerkwater planet is throwing ducks?" Sulu straightened in his chair. "They're cranes!" The Federation slung the crane back at him. It only flew about halfway. "They look like ducks." "Stop acting like children," Perez Salazar's Latin contralto cut through the beginning of Sulu's reply. "You're only complaining," she accused the Federation, "because you plan to use Vulcan as the solution to all your problems. This is what you deserve for not having the courage to act for yourself." "What I don't deserve," the Federation returned acidly, "is a bunch of warmongering idiots grubbing up every planet they come to and then claiming they own the whole system." Sulu thought he had never before seen someone's soul truly catch fire. Perez Salazar's face grew even darker as her eyes began to smolder. Cohn started across the room for the head table. "Okay, people, I think that's enough for now." "You're accusing my people of cowardly acts?" Sulu wasn't sure whether Perez Salazar was responding from a sense of offended nationality or if she'd gotten too involved in the role-playing. "Take it as you will," the Federation replied. Perez Salazar rocketed to her feet just as Cohn reached the table. She spit on the table in front of the Federation. "Congratulations, El Jefe Estupendo. You now have a war." Cohn physically sat herself on the table between the two, stopping the Federation's advance with a warning hand on his chest. "This is make-believe," she reminded him, then turned to rake a meaningful look across the rest of the room. Maybe you'll all appreciate the usefulness of make-believe in the rest of your training. Waiting until the Federation had nodded his understanding and returned to his chair, Cohn motioned that Perez Salazar should sit as well. I wish you could all just listen to yourselves. It's like recess with a bunch of kids. Nobody laughed. I have never had a less cooperative, more selfish block of cadets in my life. Cohn continued through their guilty silence. You were all chosen to be here because you're special, intelligent, because you display abilities common to good command officers. She paced toward the middle of the gathering, turning slowly as she walked in order to rake an icy glare across them all. Well, where did all those fine traits go? Stopping just behind Sulu's chair, she leaned against the back of it. I saw one of you use creativity and cooperation to solve the problems put to him, and everybody else either made fun of him or ignored him. Sulu had a feeling he knew who was being singled out. If this had been real life, Cohn berated the rest of them, you'd be lucky if Menak didn't bomb you all while you were busy squabbling among yourselves. Sulu slipped the terrorist crane into his pocket as surreptitiously as he could manage. In later scenarios, you won't get the chance to be so kind to one another, even if you feel so inclined. She looked them over with cold-hearted calculation one last time, then broke into a friendly smile and clapped her hands. The transformation was so complete, Sulu didn't know whether to respect her flexibility or resent her manipulations. Okay, everybody, she cried, making herding motions toward the closest door. Time for lunch. Go put food in your stomachs. You've got a million things to do yet today. Sulu tossed his accoutrements onto the growing pile on the head table, pocketing the last of his origami cranes. I don't suppose you'd be interested in a housing deal on Menak 3, he quipped to Perez Salazar. She didn't dignify his comment with a reply. Sulu barely noticed the passage of the next week. Class, followed drill, followed meals. Sleep must have occurred somewhere between the busy days, but Sulu honestly had no memories to account for all the nights. What happened on Tuesday was as distant or as near as what commenced on Friday. Sulu took to dating his class notes and his private reminders just to keep the past in perspective. His future he didn't even think about as yet. He recognized Monday when it arrived only because it was the very first day on which he had any inkling what would happen next. His class schedule was the same as that first Monday, and he had kept meticulous record. Somehow, the warp-driven pace seemed a little less grueling, the instructors and courses just a little less confusing with that time schedule as an anchor for reality. Sulu achieved the end of the day in much better humor than he had 1 week before. No voices greeted him upon his return to the bunker. He was somewhat surprised to have beaten everyone else back, but privately admitted that sprinting across the quad, the weather was far too exhilarating to allow mere walking, probably affected his time. He sailed his course notes at his bunk from 3 meters distance, then swung into the adjacent concession by catching the doorpost with one hand as he danced past. He stumbled to a stop when Poppy called cheerfully, I was hoping you'd get here soon. Sulu dashed frantic looks in all directions, expecting Cohn to appear like an avenging angel and shrivel him with a glance. Oh, what are you doing here? He demanded in a high-stage whisper. How did you get here? This is a restricted campus. The old man climbed to his feet, patting Sulu's cheek as though to soothe the ensign's distress. All Japanese men look distinguished, he explained. I told them I was an admiral. Oh, good God! Tetsuo followed amiably, and Sulu dragged him toward the door. They were polite before then, but they got very polite afterward. They said I could find you here. Poppy! Sulu checked both directions before leading his great-grandfather out into the hall. I think it's a capital offense to impersonate Starfleet officers. Tetsuo scoffed. I didn't impersonate anybody, he insisted. I didn't even give them my name. I don't think that's the point. When the door at the end of the hall whisked open, Sulu tucked Tetsuo back against the wall until he had glanced around the corner to verify the presence of a guard. A bored senior cadet wandered back and forth in front of the doorway, occasionally glancing at the inviting weather outside. Where are we going? Sulu put his hand over Tetsuo's mouth. The old man fell obligingly silent. You want to be an admiral? Sulu whispered. Tetsuo shrugged. Not especially. Well, do what I do anyway, and don't say anything. Sulu didn't wait for Tetsuo's acknowledgement. Stepping through the doorway, he pulled his shoulders back, tucked his chin up, and strode purposefully toward the guard at the end of the hall. The cadet turned at the sound of Sulu's footsteps, waving a cordial hello as the other cadet approached. Returning the security guard's casual greeting with a terse nod, Sulu barely glanced at the young man on his way by. Tetsuo's friendly hello was almost lost under Sulu's stiff carry on. Once on the quad, Sulu relaxed his stance and turned to pull Tetsuo up next to him. I told you not to talk, he scolded, walking them further away from the building. Tetsuo shrugged, grinning. I forgot. Sulu growled with feigned frustration and pulled the older man into a hug. Maybe we can get you off on mental incompetence. Tetsuo chuckled and returned his great-grandson's hug soundly. I've always thought that wouldn't be hard. But seriously, Poppy, don't sneak in again. You can get us both in a lot of trouble. If you say so. He pushed Sulu away and started them walking again. So, how is everything? Okay, Sulu allowed. It's only been a week. I've been too busy to have an opinion. The air gusted around them with the smell of ocean and late roses. It ruffled Sulu's hair like a warm, loving hand. You could have called if that's all you wanted to know. Tetsuo didn't answer. Sulu glanced over at his great-grandfather when the older man reached inside his jacket for a tiny square of colored paper. He folded a delicate crane as they walked. Poppy? The smile on the old man's face was sweet and happy, like the smell of fragile honeysuckle just before the frost. Poppy, is something wrong? Tetsuo's eyes remained fixed on his tiny work. I'm dying, son, he said without prelude. Sulu wasn't sure how he was supposed to respond to that, so he only slipped his arm around his great-grandfather's shoulders and whispered, I know, Poppy. No, I mean really, Tetsuo went on. Right now. The crane finished. He tucked it gently into another pocket and retrieved another slip of paper. Dr. Cobran says the tumor's bigger. He wants to operate on me. Coldness swelled against Sulu's heart. And? Tetsuo paused in his folding, smiling wanly at Sulu. I came here because I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to explain. The coldness closed into a painful fist. Explain about what? He didn't want to understand. Tetsuo put away the half-finished crane to take both of Sulu's hands in his own. The operation isn't really going to help anything. It'll make the tumor smaller. Dr. Cobran says. But they can't take it completely away because of the way it grows. Sulu nodded slowly. I know that. So operating could maybe kill me. It won't make the treatments unnecessary, and it may not even slow down how the tumor grows. All it does, at best, is make it all go on a little longer. Dr. Cobran is the best in the world, Sulu insisted, wanting to speak before Poppy got too far, wanting to make him understand. If he says you should do it, then you should. It's better than nothing. Tetsuo squeezed his great-grandson's hands and smiled. I'm not so sure about that anymore. Panic swam counterclockwise to sorrow. Why are you telling me this, Poppy? Sulu demanded urgently. What is it you're trying to say? I'm trying to say, Tetsuo said gently, that 103 is older than God ever meant people to be. Giving you something like a grade 4 glioma in his way of telling you to hurry it up. Give the next generation a crack at the world. He reached up to touch his great-grandson's face. I wanted you to understand why I told Dr. Cobran to stop their treatments, because I know no one else ever will." Sulu's stomach twisted in silent despair. You can't stop the treatments." "I already have." "No, Poppy." He pulled away, out of the old man's reach, out of his grasp. "Don't you realize what'll happen? Don't you understand what you've done?" "I've gained a month, maybe 2, of feeling happy, healthy, and alive before I die," Tetsuo told him. "Whatever comes after that," he shrugged. "Maybe nobody really knows, but it doesn't frighten me anymore." Sulu felt tears ringing out of his ragged emotions. You're giving up," he accused, furious. "You're going to desert me just because you're afraid to—" "No," Tetsuo interrupted sternly. "I'm not afraid. Not of dying. Not like this, at least. I'm afraid of dying badly, son. I'm afraid that if I wait—" Pain glittered in his stone-black eyes. "I have loved my life. I loved your great-grandmother. I loved all the children we had together, and all their children, and all theirs. I loved boating and the ocean, and the way my face felt after the salt and wind dried it all shiny like the sand. I loved the animals at the gardens, and those plants you used to bring home all the time." His voice trailed off into a gentle laugh. His eyes focused again, and he sighed. "I want to say goodbye to all that while we're still on speaking terms. If I stay, I'm afraid I'll learn to hate living. Then I'd really have nothing to live for after all." Sulu stared at his great-grandfather, ashamed of the cold tears on his cheeks, ashamed that shedding those tears should make him so afraid. "Dr. Coburn will stop you." "He won't," Tetsuo said with certainty. "I have thought a long time about this, and I've been folding cranes." He displayed the half-done crane, shiny purple in the afternoon light. Sulu slapped the paper construct out of his hand. "I don't care about your damn cranes," he cried, his voice choking on the pain gathered in his throat. I care about you, Poppy. You said you'd come when I graduated. You said—" "I'm sorry, but it has to be done. It has to be this way." Sulu jerked away when Tetsuo reached up to touch him. Lonely disappointment flashed through the old man's eyes. "I thought you, of all people, would understand." "Well, I don't," Sulu grated, "and I never will. How could you want to die? How could you want to leave me?" He felt more tears rush to the surface and turned away before his great-grandfather's gentle sorrow could make him cry. "Just go home and die if you want to," he shouted. "Don't try to make me justify it for you." When he broke and ran for the bunker, he didn't know if he wanted Tetsuo to stop him or let him go. As it was, his great-grandfather said nothing. It was that image of Tetsuo, standing abandoned and small in the middle of the windy quad, that Sulu would remember for the rest of his days. Ugh! Sulu threw himself onto his bunk, not caring enough about the mud and pitch and detritus on his uniform to bother stripping out of his clothes. "I can't believe anybody actually lives in those mountains," he moaned to the cadet in the next bunk over. "What did they say? 2.5 million people in one of the smaller cultural centers alone?" His companion's uniform and equipment were as filthy and sweat-soaked as Sulu's. He displayed the same lack of concern for his bed's welfare as he stretched out on his own bunk. Cadets all throughout the bunker were engaged in similar pursuits. "I feel like I haven't slept in weeks," Sulu replied. "After 2 months of midnight drills and 6 a.m. breakfast calls, you'd think I'd be used to this." The cadet's only reply was a loud snore. Sulu closed his own eyes, relishing the decadent feel of relaxation. After a week and a half on the other side of the North American continent, Sulu welcomed even San Francisco's damp, chilly autumn. They'd been dropped in 10 degrees centigrade weather in the northern Allegheny Mountains and instructed to make their way to a predetermined base as soon as you can. They'd had sufficient gear and food to keep them alive, Sulu had hoped, but it was a white-haired, smart-mouthed boy from upstate New York who saved them all. He reckoned directions by the stars better than anyone Sulu had ever seen. They reached their destination in record time, losing only a backpack and a sleeping tent in the process. Sulu, as commander of the excursion, was distinctly pleased. He was also exhausted. Classes, duties, and drills demanded more time and energy than Sulu would have believed he possessed 2 months ago. And this trek through the Alleghenies was only the last on a long list. He took inspiration and stamina from every available source: invigorating conversations, newly formed friendships, frequent naps, and frequent meals. But his greatest source of strength was his family. Communications from home, especially from Poppy, had formed the underpinnings of his endurance. He hadn't realized how much he would miss that support until it ceased. Tetsuo had called twice after their argument on the quad. Sulu responded to neither recorded message, but the second made him silently cry himself to sleep. "I feel wonderful," Poppy had told him. "I feel free. If I can't make you understand why it has to be this way, at least be happy for me. I love you so much." The worst part of it was that Sulu thought perhaps he did understand. His life and activity were always so important to Tetsuo. The same things were important to Sulu as well. He couldn't imagine his own life without Starfleet, without windsailing, without fencing. But if he admitted to himself and to Tetsuo that there was dignity in choosing the time to die, it might seem as though he condoned it, and he didn't want Tetsuo to go. Sulu rolled over roughly, uttering a guttural sound of frustration. Unhappy thoughts slipped to the back of his mind, following a route well worn after 2 months of dismissal. He tried studiously to will himself to sleep before any more thinking could occur. He didn't know how long he'd been dozing before someone jounced his bed. "Mail call, rise and shine." Sulu struggled into a sitting position, feeling as though he'd been bound up in cotton like a mummy. He held out a hand for the message tape the other cadet presented to him. "Oh, thanks," he muttered fuzzily. But the mail carrier was already awakening the next cadet in line. "Mail call!" Sulu squinted at the message's origin through a yawn. When he saw the California transmit code, the last of his tattered haze of sleep dashed away. He scrambled to his feet. Sunside, as Sulu and the other cadets eventually discovered, was a recreation area for off-duty cadets. No one had ever discovered a reason for the enigmatic name, but with time, no one seemed to care anymore either. Along with the chairs, tables, and food services stations, Sunside also sported 7 reader terminals. The terminals were deserted now. Sulu slipped into the closest booth. No doubt everyone in this block was still recovering from the wild and frigid Alleghenies. His name, rank, and serial number appeared, followed by a return transmit code that he didn't immediately recognize. He sat back in the padded seat and waited to see who was the originator. Arthur Coburn's face appeared on the screen, backed by a room Sulu didn't recognize, and accompanied by voices Sulu had never heard. All hope inside him paused, but he couldn't bear to banish it just yet. "Cadet Sulu?" Coburn said, his voice low and strangely roughened. They say you were gone on maneuvers. I hope those went well. I only wish I wish you were here, son. I'd rather tell you this, not some machine." Coburn glanced over his shoulder anxiously, his eyes following something beyond Sulu's ability to see. When he turned back, his eyes were sad. "Your great-grandfather died today, son. I tried to call you, but they said you were gone. I didn't want to leave a message, a lot of messages for you to find when you got back. He was only sick for the last week, only really sick for the last few hours. He was really happy, son, and he missed you. He said to tell you." Coburn dropped his gaze, scrubbing his eyes to the heels of his hands. "He said to tell you he loved you," he finally finished miserably, "that he always had and always would. He left a bunch of those paper cranes you and he used to make all the time. 1,000 of them, he said. He said you'd understand." Someone interrupted him again from behind. Dr. Coburn nodded in acknowledgement, then raised his sad face again. "I have to go. I'm sorry I had to tell you like this. Call me at the hospital if you'd like. I'm so sorry, son." The transmission ended on a white corridor wall, while a distant intercom called Dr. Coburn away to care for some patient who was still among the living. The rock upon which Sulu laid was bone-eating cold, smoothed by centuries of interplay with the ocean and by the feathery green plants that clung to it for support. Foliage draped in limp tendrils across mussels, stones, and mollusks to bob in the moonlit tidal pools like weary undines. Sulu felt them cool and moist beneath his stomach as he stared across the glassy sea. Like the kelp, ebb tide found the young cadet without the strength to stand. The ocean seemed his only respite after Dr. Coburn's horrible message. Sulu left Sunside without bothering to take the tape from the reader, stopping in the bunker only long enough to slide a bulky box out from its place in his locker. He walked away from the bunker, the quad, and the academy without speaking to another living soul. The box cut into his chest now, pinned between his pain-racked body and the cold, kelp-wrapped rock. Sulu had emptied the contents of the box into the retreating tide. The last of the thumb-sized cranes floated beyond the limits of his sight over an hour ago. Silver, white, transparent, rainbow blue, he'd folded them out of any material that fell into his hands. While high in the Alleghenies, he'd folded more than a dozen out of the scarlet and white protective strips on their rations. He'd folded them against the growing numbers he knew his great-grandfather collected. Folded in desperate need of a miracle now that science and love had failed him. Folded 644 before Poppy finished his 1,000th and ended the silent race. Now the evening breeze blew the little cranes out to sea like 600 vanished souls, leaving only Sulu and an empty container behind. It was moonless and full dark before Sulu was able to rouse himself and stand. He felt stiff and sick and tired, partly a legacy of the cold rock he'd been hugging, partly the emotional vacancy that ate at his heart like a dying fire. He walked with cottony, uncaring steps up the jagged embankment, across the long green concourse, down the quiet, starlit streets. He deposited the box into a refuse container as he passed. The academy quad was warm and well lit upon his return. Moving into the almost daylight, something like embarrassment stirred in Sulu and made him brush ineffectually at the front of his singlet. A few pieces of kelp dislodged to fall wetly to the stones at his feet. Sulu wished he'd thought about his appearance before stretching out on the rock, but he couldn't truthfully say he'd thought about anything except somehow freeing the cranes he tried to contain. At that time, that had seemed so terribly important. As he stepped through the student entrance, the guard on duty nodded a reserved, "Good evening." Sulu returned the greeting, but didn't pause. He heard the ensign open an intercom panel just before he passed into the hall. Cone waited against the wall outside the bunker. "Good evening, Commodore." Even her dark eyes looked cold in the subdued light. "Congratulations," she said quietly. "You've just accrued a batch of demerits that'll take 3 years to undo." Tears welled up inside him again, and he did everything he could to keep them out of his voice. I know, sir. I'm sorry." "Save your sorries for your parents," she countered. The disappointment and anger on her face hurt far worse than her words. "This is command school. I don't give a damn what you apologize for. I give a damn what you do." She pushed away from the wall with a rough, angry movement and started down the hall. "Go in and get to bed. We're running a scenario tomorrow that you're going to need your sleep for." "Thank you, sir." He'd spoken so softly he doubted she had heard. Even if she had, he felt sure she wouldn't care. Including responding to computer-generated incidents such as any starship captain is apt to encounter, Cone continued, ceasing her pacing of the lecture hall to sit on the edge of the raised platform. "The commander of the USS Exeter, your ship for the course of this scenario, was chosen by our all-wise, all-knowing computer earlier this morning." She angled her chin upward to meet Sulu's gaze from all the way down the long hall. He didn't know if he should be horrified or flattered. "Are you ready to take your post, Captain Sulu?" Everyone turned to look at him, some to smile, some to stare. Sulu only shook his head dumbly and said, "I don't want to be the captain." Cone's look of disappointed anger from the night before flashed briefly into being again. "Then why are you in command school?" I don't care what you meant. You're captain for this scenario. You'll be in total and complete command, even over the line officers who have agreed to help us with this. Remember that, no matter what happens." She stood then and announced to the class at large, "Be at the simulator deck in 20 minutes. Don't be late. Dismissed." Sulu sat, staring down at his hands as the rest of the class filed out the doors. His heart still ached from yesterday. He lacked the creativity to decide which pair of underwear to choose this morning, much less the quickness required to adequately command a scenario. He knew Cone would feel a little sympathy for such sentiments, though. When the last of the class arrived at the simulators, Sulu arrived along with them. The block was split into 7 different groups of varying sizes and compositions. 4 officers, 2 commanders and 2 captains, greeted Sulu's bridge crew at Simulator 4 and assigned them their positions. Sulu settled into the command chair hesitantly, feeling as though he were sitting somewhere he shouldn't, and that someone would soon come to chase him away. No one did, though, and the simulator was soon sealed and ready to run. Lights, smells, and sounds cocooned Sulu from all sides. He heard status reports from faraway sections of the non-existent ship, unimportant flippancies over intercom channels, sensors cooing peacefully beneath the more strident computer prompts. It was all so active, so real. His heart awakened ever so slightly, as though responding to some half-heard clarion. He gripped the arms of the chair for strength. "Helmsman," he beckoned, trying for briskness, instead achieving a sort of breathless anxiety. "What is our current heading?" The cadet at the helm glanced at the officer manning navigations. Completely in character, the officer only raised an inquiring eyebrow and turned back to her own equations. Nodding, the helmsman reported the heading, then added, of his own accord, "That will take us within 15.7 parsecs of the Klingon neutral zone, sir." Sulu was certain that detail would matter. Swinging his chair about, he confronted his executive officer. He drew back slightly in surprise and alarm to see Perez Salazar seated in the XX station by the turbolift doors. He didn't know why her presence hadn't registered before. "First Officer Perez Salazar," he said, recovering. "What is the nature of our mission in this sector?" Apparently much more at ease with her position in this scenario, she consulted her computer briefly. "Routine scouting," she reported. "We are due to take on supplies at Station F9 in 4 days. "Is F9 on the neutral zone?" Perez Salazar smiled grimly. "If we could cut through the neutral zone, we could reach F9 in 12 hours. "I see." Sulu rotated his chair back toward the front, only just remembering to say, "Thank you, Mr. Perez Salazar." The helmsman and navigator both looked at him expectantly. Sulu flashed him a confident grin and instructed, "Navigator Janda, plot a course around the neutral zone for rendezvous with Station F9. Helmsman, ahead warp 3. "Course plotted and laid in, sir." "Warp 3, sir. Aye, aye." Sulu settled back in the chair a bit more comfortably. "Very good. Carry on." He'd barely had the chance to adjust to his newfound status before the communications officer started in her seat and called, "I'm receiving a transmission." She touched her earpiece and frowned. "It's very garbled, sir, and it's on the distress channel." Sulu uncrossed his legs and sat forward in his chair. "A distress call?" This was working up to be an interesting scenario indeed. "Put it on audio." The communications officer complied. A broken wall of static filled the tiny bridge. "Maru, 19 periods out of 6. The voice was British, thin with both distance and concern. "Mayday, mayday, neutronic fuel carrier Kobayashi Maru, 19 out of Altair. We have struck a gravitic mine. All power, many casualties." "Gravitic mine?" one of the cadets whispered. The captain at navigations nodded bleakly. "I don't know who lays them, I just know they tear the hell out of passenger ships and freighters." "They do a good number on starships, too," an engineering cadet added. "Hull breach, do you read? Mayday, mayday." Sulu signaled communications to ready them for reply. "Kobayashi Maru," he declared. "This is USS Exeter. What is your position?" "Read you, Exeter. Sector 10. Sulu glanced at the navigator, who winced. "In the neutral zone, sir." Sulu stopped the next words he planned to say. "Exeter, we're losing air. Can you help us? Over." "Sir," communications finally prompted, "do you wish to reply?" "The neutral zone." "Helm," Sulu said more softly, "give me a long-range scan on that sector. What do you get?" The helmsman nodded his lower lip, then finally shook his head. Dust, gas. I'm getting a lot of interference. Is there a ship out there? I think so, sir. That didn't help with the decision. You think so? The helmsman opened his mouth as though ready to commit more fully, then scanned the readings again and sighed. I don't know, sir. When Sulu said nothing for several moments, Perez Salazar pressed. Captain, the Kobayashi Maru is awaiting your reply. Sulu nodded slowly, stiffly. Kobayashi Maru, you are a civilian freighter? Neutronic fuel carrier. 300 passengers. Exeter, what's the problem? What are you doing in the neutral zone? The answer this time was long in coming. Don't know. Must have slipped course. Exeter, can you help us? Sulu swallowed, feeling a sickness in his stomach. It told him everything he was about to do was wrong. Only something else inside him knew this was his only choice. Kobayashi Maru, he answered calmly. I'm sorry. We can't help you. I'm afraid you're on your own. He felt his small crew stir like agitated bees, but no one said anything to him. Breaching the Klingon neutral zone with the Constitution-class starship could be considered an act of war. An interplanetary conflict with the Klingons would result in millions of lost lives, and that's a risk I am not prepared to take for the lives of so few. I'm very, very sorry. You daft? We're dying. I'm sorry. Captain, The communications officer recoiled slightly when Sulu turned. That's really lousy, she said, dropping out of the scenario. I think we ought to go in. She's right, the helmsman intervened. You can't just leave them out there. We're leaving them. Sulu couldn't believe his voice sounded so calm and assured. You've got your course, mister. The navigator, laughing slightly, turned away from her panel. You can't do this, she began. I'm the commander, Sulu reminded her firmly. But his insides quivered, and he didn't dare let go of the command chair, lest they see how badly he was shaking. I have total control over this vessel, and I have made my decision. A hard decision, a horrible decision, a decision that means all of those people will die. The navigator nodded and turned back to her post. Listen, Sulu, the cadet at the security station interjected. We're supposed to be in Starfleet. We're supposed to guard and protect. Avoiding a war is cowardice. Kobayashi Maru is less than 50 parsecs into the neutral zone. We could be in and out before the Klingons even knew we were there. They may already know. No one interrupted, so Sulu went on. What is Kobayashi Maru doing in the neutral zone anyway? Why can't we clearly scan her coordinates? The ionization factor, the helmsman began, but Sulu cut him off. Possibly. Or a Klingon trap. There may be no ship out there to rescue. The cadet at the science station threw his hands up in disgust. Sulu noted with some irritation that it was the Federation from the galactic politics scenario on their first day. That's so damn paranoid, the cadet exclaimed. Do you mean to say that, as a starship captain, you would couch all of your decision in terms of maybes? Sulu looked at him, unsure how to respond. What else is there? Protests erupted from all across the bridge, some of them in favor of his decision, most of them emphatically opposed. Sulu kept expecting the floor-to-ceiling view screen to crack like an oyster and return them all to cone in the outside world. He studied the stars displayed on the screen and waited. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice cut in sharply from behind him, this is mutiny! The uproar cut off like a transmission that had suddenly lost its signal. Every thought in Sulu's brain simply ceased, and he turned the command chair slowly as Perez Salazar queried, Should I contact security, sir, and have these miscreants thrown in the brig? He only blinked at her. Calm down, Mate, the security cadet grumbled. Her eyes splashed him with prideful fury. If we are to treat this scenario as reality for the purposes of rescuing Kobayashi Maru, then we should treat our officers realistically as well. She turned to all of them, scowling her disgust. If this is how you would truly respond to your commander and peers, I never want to serve on a starship with any of you. Her dark gaze glanced off Sulu, and he felt the implicit, except you, in that look. Pride and shame, strangely intermixed, thickened his throat beyond his ability to respond. How dare you, she went on, stepping down to stand by his right hand. How dare any of you assume his decision is an act of cowardice? You! She stabbed a finger at the cadet manning communications. Save your starship or save yourself. Choose, now! He opened his mouth, shut it, and opened it again and stammered, my ship. The scowl that twisted Perez Salazar's dark Latin face betrayed her opinion of his decisiveness. Do you say that because you really wish the ship to survive, or because you're afraid of the repercussions should you choose the more selfish option? The cadet didn't volunteer a reply. No matter how noble that choice may seem to you or to others, that was a decision of cowardice, she told him. For it to be truly noble, you must choose death, because to live any other way is unthinkable. Sulu sucked in his breath abruptly, feeling as though he'd been kicked deep and hard from inside. Mr. Perez Salazar. She turned, straight and proud, at his summons. That will be all, thank you. He didn't look away when she paused to study his eyes with painful candor. Yes, sir. Passing her muster left him somehow strangely pleased. Communications, he said, turning back to the front. Contact the nearest starbase with details on the Kobayashi Maru. If Starfleet can locate a Klingon representative in time, it might still be possible to save the freighter. In the meantime, we have a supply run to make. Helm? Only the navigator uttered a cool, aye, aye, sir, in acknowledgement. But they all turned back to their stations without complaint. I hope he knows what he's doing, the science officer whispered to someone beyond Sulu's sight. The ensign remained fixed on the stars and pretended not to hear. What has to be done, he told himself gently. I understand that now, Poppy. I honestly really do. Brutal. He decided that was the best word to describe the lecture and review following the Kobayashi Maru scenario. Cohn replayed the events on a large-scale monitor, embarrassing Sulu as well as everyone else in the bridge crew. Then the class discussed their opinions and suggestions regarding the young ensign's course of action. While the Commodore was studiously nonpartisan throughout the debate, the bridge crew wasn't quite so hostile by the time class let out. Sulu felt he had a pretty good idea what Cohn's view of his decision had been. The knowledge made him proud. The wind through the quad was brisk and chilly, but sunlight leapt from one granite-flecked square to the next as Sulu crossed the white stone plaza. It seemed somehow sinful to be so light-hearted less than 24 hours after hearing of Tetsuo's death, but Sulu thought Poppy would understand, and maybe even approve. He caught sight of Perez Salazar walking alone, as always, a half-dozen running steps ahead of him. Oscillating only briefly between approaching her and pretending not to see, his feet solved the dilemma for him by lengthening their strides until he found himself matching her stiff, determined gait. Hi! She glanced at him pugnaciously, and he continued before she could speak. I wanted to thank you for standing up for me during the simulation. It was big help. She looked forward again and shrugged. I didn't do it for your benefit. Her eyes almost glanced at him, but she seemed to remember herself and directed them away again. You were simply in the right, that's all. Sulu smiled. I had a good teacher. She didn't prompt him for further information. He considered letting that mean she didn't want to talk to him further, but decided he didn't want to play this game by her rules anymore. My great-grandfather had a lot of understanding about responsibility and things that just need doing. The pain inflicted by the subject was barely overbalanced by the love he would always feel for the old man. You'd have liked him, he told her. He was a very strong man. And a wise man, Perez Salazar allowed. A very wise man if he taught you these things so well. Her voice was just as cold as always, but Sulu still felt warmed by her words. Yes, he admitted, a very wise man. He taught me the difference between playing hero and being responsible, and how sometimes the two can be the same. He continued matching her pace as they approached the main building, not wanting to break this newfound rapport with Perez Salazar, yet not sure how to continue it. As they entered the building's long gray shadow, he asked abruptly, Have you ever seen old San Francisco? She paused in her walking, and so surprised Sulu that he almost overshot her position. No, she said warily. Why? Well, I'm a great native guide, Sulu informed her with a wink. We could get passes for this evening, and I'll show you Golden Gate Park and Fisherman's Wharf and Palace of Fine Arts. He saw something like panic move in her eyes and amended, No strings, just a thank you. Really. The panic subsided, leaving only a vestigial smile on her face. The smile made her very pretty. All right, I shall meet you here after supper. Great. Sulu dug into his pocket and drew out the crumpled paper crane that he had folded during the class debate over his Kobayashi Maru decision. He presented it to Perez Salazar with a flourish. Redeemable for one dynamite tour. She took it as though it were a soiled sock. This is one of those ducks, she complained, but not so severely as her expression suggested. You folded these all through our first scenario. Flattered that she'd even noticed him during the turmoil of galactic politics, he hid his embarrassment behind an expression of resignation. They aren't ducks, they're cranes. Cranes? Sulu closed her hand about the tiny construct and explained patiently. In ancient Japan, cranes were revered for their grace and beauty. It was believed that if you folded 1,000 paper cranes while meditating, you could create a miracle. Perez Salazar opened her hand, only long enough to sneak a look at the origami bird, and smiled more stunningly than before. Does it work? A swell of pain and love overwhelmed him again, and Sulu thought of Poppy and nodded. I believe it does, he told her sincerely. I really believe it might be true.